The police timeline of what happened when at the shooting in Texas last week continues to change, and both police and the school district have stopped cooperating with the Texas probe, raising all sorts of questions about what on earth happened, including some less than helpful speculation, and we'll talk about all of it. If there's one thing that we can be sure of, if any talking point has been brutally destroyed by what happened in Texas last week, it's the idea of the good guy with the gun as the solution to bad guys with guns. That has been utterly and completely destroyed. But we still have to figure out what is going on and why it is not only that the police and school district have stopped cooperating with the Texas investigation, but why the timeline put out there by police continues to change. There's a CNN article addressing this. As the funerals continue, authorities' timeline of the terror at Robb Elementary School continues to shift. The Texas Department of Public Safety now says the door the shooter used to access the school was closed, but not locked when he entered before killing 21 people there. That's a change from last week when the department's director said the back door had been propped open by a teacher. Turns out that apparently wasn't true. On Tuesday, its spokesperson told the AP the teacher closed the door once she realized the shooter was on campus, but the door did not lock. The department's press secretary confirmed yesterday to CNN that the AP report was accurate. Tuesday's clarification represents just one of the shifts in authorities' explanations of the massacre's timeline. They face mounting questions over why 80 minutes. We at first thought it was 40 to 60. We now know 80 minutes elapsed from the time officers were called to the moment a tactical team entered the locked classrooms and killed the gunman. These are sort of like the main changes so far, and also important and unclear why, and we're going to talk about this more on the bonus show, is this question of why the cooperation has stopped. ABC News reporting. Uvalde Police School District no longer cooperating with Texas probe of shooting. The police department and independent school district police force are no longer cooperating with the Texas Department of Public Safety's investigation into the massacre at the elementary school, multiple law enforcement sources tell ABC. The Uvalde police chief and spokesperson for the school district did not immediately respond for requests for comment. According to sources, the decision to stop cooperating occurred soon after the director of DPS held a news conference Friday, during which he said the delayed police entry into the classroom was the wrong decision and contrary to protocol. Something clearly is going on here. Now, there are some who are going way beyond what the facts show. I even started to see, I hesitate to even mention this, but I think it's important to mention with the note that there's no evidence of this, that some are saying this is evidence that it might have actually been police that killed some of the victims. There is no evidence of that at this point in time. Absolutely none. But the point is to let you know how far some are going in interpreting the halt to the cooperation. The most likely scenario is also the most obvious scenario, which is the response was bungled. The good guys with the guns didn't go in, at least partially because they were afraid of being shot, with which I sympathize. But the whole point of having police is that they are the good guys with guns to stop the bad guys with guns. And waiting 80 minutes is not the way the system is supposed to work. But listen, who wouldn't be afraid of getting shot if there's a gunman with multiple assault rifles going crazy? That part makes sense. The response does not. That's the most likely explanation, that it was mishandled and they tried to stay one step ahead of the questions that eventually came because their explanations didn't make sense. They failed to actually stay a step ahead, and now it's all coming down. That's the most likely explanation. The speculation is going to be there regardless. But the most important takeaway here, as we get back to the main thing, is this is not going to be the problem of mass shootings is not going to be resolved by talking about mental health alone. Obviously, it's not. And in fact, we'll later talk about how Greg Abbott says it's a mental health issue, but defunded mental health in Texas. Unbelievable. That's not going to solve it. It's not going to be an issue with doors. And it's certainly not going to be an issue of more armed people. At some point, you're going to have to deal with the firearms. And we will discuss more about this on today's bonus show. The real mental health issue might actually be the Republican Party. There is a new piece in the New Republic by Michael Tomasky called "The Main Mental Health Issue in This Country is in the Republican Party." And this piece makes a number of really good points. One of the points that the piece makes, and I encourage you to read it, is that red states allocate way less money for treating mental illness than do blue states. And in fact, if you look at a map, and we're putting such a map up on the screen, you can see that generally speaking, red states are much lighter colored, meaning they devote a much smaller share of their budgets towards mental health treatment. That we know. And so at a baseline level, this is a bad start. When you look back at the last many years, there has really only been one major expansion of mental health spending and coverage, and it's called the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Remember, Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are the same thing. I know it's wild that I have to mention that, but I do. And Republicans regularly vote against all other attempts, as I've talked about with Greg Abbott, or we will talk about with Greg Abbott, as I talked about with Congressman Tony Gonzalez. Republicans regularly vote against attempts to increase funding and increase access to mental health treatment. So at a core level, when we say mental health, mental illness, red states are disproportionately underfunded when it comes to access. So it's a perfectly logical conclusion. You've got more Republicans than Democrats in red states. Red states have lower funding for mental health treatment. Increasingly, mental illness, you would expect, would skew towards being a Republican problem. To be clear, it doesn't mean at all that there aren't millions of lefties and Democrats, et cetera, who struggle with mental illness. But when you look at access and treatment and funding, it's going to skew as a bigger problem to the right. But it's more than that. The problem in terms of mental health isn't just health care. It's also about economic care. We know about the crushing effect on one's mood and cognitive state and mental health status of being unable to take time off from work when you need it, of knowing that you're going to be able to just pay your basic bills, of feeling like there's no economic opportunity where you are. And when you look at all of these different things, when you look at right-wing economic policy versus left-wing economic policy, the economic realities of red states, we know, are much more negatively impactful on mental health and sort of the state of one's mood than those economic policies in blue-leaning states. Again, these are averages. We're talking generally. Now, there's another layer, which Tomasky doesn't talk about in the piece, which I want to add, which is when we talk about a lot of these right-wing ideas, they sound almost what we might call mentally ill. Now, I want to be really careful. We may not literally mean mentally ill in all of these cases. OK, we're not stigmatizing mental illness. We're also not using it as an insult. But when you hear the idea, give teachers guns and have them defend classrooms, it sounds like what you would say is an insane idea. It's disconnected from reality. Only someone who has something wrong, either significant ignorance or some kind of mental disturbance, would suggest, because it doesn't make any sense. And we can go further. There was a recent poll, 20% or more of the Republican Party believes at least some QAnon conspiracies. Okay, is it literally diagnostic mental illness? No, it's not. But a lot of this ideology borders on people who are having some kind of block where they're not connected to the real world. There's a delusional nature to it. After the 2020 election, 57% of Trump voters believed that Trump won. Trump didn't win. Joe Biden won. Joe Biden easily won the popular vote. Joe Biden easily won the electoral vote. No one state would have changed that of the states that were in play. Trump didn't win. Trump lost. And yet 57% of his voters believed that he had won. at some point we have to say, well, there's a delusional nature to it. Is it diagnostically delusional? Well, that you'd have to examine everybody, and mental health professionals would have to make the call. But when we talk about mental health, the fact that they're saying, well, just fix shootings by dealing with mental health rather than guns. Well, at the micro level, they vote against doing that all the time. They don't want to fund mental health treatment. They don't want to do any of it. But when we say it's a mental illness problem, what are we really saying? And when you step back and look at the state of American politics, and you look at where access to mental health treatment is funded, and you look at the delusional nature of a lot of these ideas, again, I know I always use this example. We're not talking about a difference as to whether the top tax rate should be 20%, 35%, or 50%. Okay, this is a different thing. We're talking about something that is fundamentally delusional. And you need only look at the NRA convention. You need to only look at the so-called suggestions that they're coming up with to deal with the gun violence issue to see that. So I'm not diagnosing anybody. I'm not stigmatizing mental illness, and I'm not ridiculing mental illness. I'm also not using the term mental illness as a cudgel to attack people with. But I am pointing out that when we talk about mental illness broadly, we really have to dig into what is happening state by state to understand the implications of, number one, not properly funding dealing with mental health issues, and number two, pointing to them in some vague way when we blame shootings, but then all of a sudden we can't say, hey, half of the ideas associated with Trumpism are delusional, colloquially. I'm sort of at a loss for words to go further, but I'm very curious to hear from you. What do you think? Find me on Twitter at @dpacman. And remember that Tuesday, June 14th at 6 p.m., we'll be doing our next David Pakman Show viewer town hall. It will be streaming live exclusively on the Pakman Live YouTube channel. That's our second YouTube channel. Subscribe there, and we're very much looking forward to that next town hall. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time, and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. The David Pakman Show is an audience-supported program. I would love for you to sign up at joinpakman.com and become a member. Every day we do an extra show for our members called The Bonus Show. We also provide a commercial-free audio stream and a commercial-free video stream of the show to our members. And we make the episodes every single day available to our members, sometimes somewhere between 5 and 6 hours earlier than we publish the full video show. You can sign up at joinpakman.com. You can use the coupon code BIGVOTING22, BIGVOTING22, because everyone must vote in November, of course. BigVoting22 at joinpakman.com. We want to continue our discussion about this whole mental health idea. We don't need to deal with guns. We just need to deal with mental health. Well, then it would follow that we need to actually make mental health treatment more accessible. Last week, we looked at Republican Texas Congressman Tony Gonzalez, and I played clips for you of Tony Gonzalez saying, this is just a mental illness problem. These shootings, it's not about guns. It's just about mental illness. That's all that we really have to deal with. And then we looked at Tony Gonzalez's voting record when it came to increased access to health care, and it was atrocious. Voting against Obamacare expansions, voting against all sorts of different funding for health-related programs, because it's just something they want to say. It's not actually something they want to deal with. Well, now we have an example of Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott. At a press conference last week, Greg Abbott again said the issue here, it's not about guns, it's about mental health. Here is Greg Abbott explaining this.
So the ability of an 18-year-old to buy a long gun has been in place in the state of Texas for more than 60 years. And think about during the time over the course of that 60 years, we have not had episodes like this.
Now, Texas actually has a pretty big mass shooting problem. But one of the things that has changed, even if they want to make the case, well, the access to guns hasn't necessarily changed in the last 60 years. The marketing to people to get more and more guns has changed over 60 years. But importantly, the culture around guns has changed over 60 years, where because of this corrosive American gun culture and the educational problems and the almost the delusional nature of the American right, more and more people come to see firearms as a way to solve problems. That's a cultural issue. So things have changed, but now we're getting to the key part.
And why is it that for the majority of those 60 years, we did not have school shootings? And why is it that we do now? The reality is, I don't know the answer to that question. However, what I do know in talking to the leaders here, as well as leaders in other locations around the state, and that is one thing that has substantially changed, is the status of mental health in our communities. What I do know is this, and that is we as a state, we as a society, need to do a better job with mental health. Anybody who shoots somebody else has a mental health challenge, period. We as a government need to find a way to target that mental health challenge.
Right. Now, the issue with all of this is, as usual, there's massive hypocrisy. Greg Abbott cut $211 million from a mental health commission. There's a report on KSAT which says Abbott has doubled down on his stance that mass shootings are an issue of mental health and not gun access. However, in April, Abbott slashed nearly $211 million from the Health and Human Services Commission, which oversees mental health services in Texas. Abbott diverted the funds to add to his effort to send National Guard to the Texas-Mexico border, known as Operation Lone Star. No other Texas agency received a more significant cut than the HHSC when Abbott slashed funding. Texas ranks 44th in the United States for an overall ranking of mental health measures and last out of all 50 states in access to mental health care. The Republican right never pays a political price for their hypocrisy, and that has to change. But think about the absurdity of this. The problem isn't guns, it's mental health. Well, okay, I mean, to a degree, we've been talking about the problems there for a long time, although there's a cultural problem as well. We got to figure out how to deal with mental health. Oh, well, how would we do that? I don't know. I cut funding to expand mental health care in my state, which is already dead last on access to mental health care, to instead use the money to send National Guard to the Texas-Mexico border. That's, and of course, unless their constituents are able to follow and understand and be aware of this, there's not going to be any accountability. There simply isn't. It's not a crazy thing to think a voter could understand. Okay, let's see. Maybe guns are part of it. Maybe they aren't. But if mental health care is a part of it, then what is Greg Abbott doing to deal with that? Actually, he's making the problem worse by defunding it to send National Guard to the border. Oh, I should vote against him. I should vote for Beto O'Rourke. I should, stay home. But I shouldn't go and vote for Greg Abbott if that's the case. But they don't hold themselves to the standards which they appear to try to hold the left to. And at this point, conservatism fundamentally is about there are in-groups and there are out-groups. And it doesn't matter what aspect of our politics we're talking about. We must protect the in-groups at all costs at the expense of the out-groups, even if we are openly hypocritical. Well, when it comes to immigration, well, we must protect the in-group, which is the natural-born American citizens or whatever. When it comes to religion, the in-group is Christians. When it comes to, you understand the idea here, and whatever principle they state is going to be ignored when it would no longer protect whatever the in-group is at the time. And mental health now is the issue in order to protect the gun owners and not have to do anything about the guns. But we're not actually going to deal with the mental health issue. When we have opportunities to fund it, we take money away. Don't you dare use my tax money to help solve that problem. We're pro-life, right? But don't you dare use my tax money to improve foster care or to help single mothers or to fund comprehensive sex education, which reduces the demand for abortions. No. This is a sickness. I mean, listen, even look at police, right? Oh, police are always right, and we must support them always when there's some police use of force against, often it's a non-white person. But then all of a sudden, well, look at what happened. Look at how the police were treated on January 6th. No. Now the police are bad and the justice system is bad because the in-group, the Trumpists, are sitting in pretrial detention. There are no actual principles that go beyond supporting the in-group, and we are very much seeing that here. An NRA convention attendee was brutally fact-checked on video, completely disproven in real time, and still says, well, I still believe the same thing. This is an incredible, epistemologically instructive event. This is from our friends over at The Good Liars, who are doing such good work. The Good Liars are Davram Stiefler and Jason Selvig. This is a great example about how confronting people with facts is useless in the face of their worldview and their pre-existing notions. If the facts support their conclusion, they'll use the facts. If the facts contradict their conclusion, they'll ignore the facts or say the facts don't matter or that it's fake news or whatever. Check this out. This is just unbelievable.
More people and more crime is committed and more people are killed with hammers every year than guns. Look at the facts.
I will look that up. I don't think that's true, actually.
That is true.
In the United States, though?
Yes, sir. That is true. Look it up. It's on. You can Google it. It's true. It's actually true.
So the number of murder victims and the weapons used. Okay, number one, handguns, 8,029. Number two, firearms, type not stated, 4,863. Number three, knives or cutting instruments, personal weapons, fists, feet. Then rifles at 455. Then blunt objects, clubs, hammers, 393. The 300, the hammers, that stat is just wrong.
Back to your question, Second Amendment is still my right and it's still important to me.
Notice how confident this guy is in something that is not only obviously wrong, but verifiably wrong and verified to his face. And notice how quickly he abandons it as instructive and informative to his opinion. Going in, part of his support for firearms was hammers are much more deadly. He's then shown hammers are not much more deadly. The fact is completely debunked, but now his opinion is no longer based on that. Now it's in the Second Amendment and that's it. So the format of this, if we wanted to kind of boil this down to a kind of fundamental logic, the format is, here's something I made up that supports my conclusion. Well, but that thing isn't true. You just invented that and it's wrong. And then, yes, but it actually doesn't matter and I still believe the same thing because it didn't really make a difference to my opinion. Oh, okay. By the way, think about hammers for a second, okay? Imagine that we took away all the hammers, all right? Wouldn't deaths from hammers go down? They almost certainly would, but people might replace the hammer with something else like a gun. Well, if those looking to kill people with hammers instead get a gun, they'll probably be able to kill more people. Do any of us disagree with that? No, the gun is much more deadly than the hammer. Well, then why isn't the opposite true, right? If we take away the guns, wouldn't deaths from guns go down? And they would say, yeah, but they might get something else like a hammer. Well, you're going to kill way fewer people with a hammer than with a gun. It's sort of like the logic is accepted by almost everyone when you go hammer to gun. If you hand someone a hammer versus a gun, who are they most likely to be? How many people are they most likely to be able to kill? People accept it going one direction, but when you say, well, if the mass shooters all had swords, wouldn't they kill fewer people? No, they'd still figure out a way to kill just as many people because the guns aren't really a factor. What? That doesn't make any sense. Makes no sense at all. So an incredibly instructive moment. Remember, the facts only matter if they are convenient. And if they aren't convenient, they no longer matter. We'll have this clip on our Instagram page, which you can find at David Pakman Show. If you value what we do at the David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. So Republican Texas Senator Ted Cruz continues to say almost downright sinister things about gun safety, most recently saying that if there were no guns in America, the number of murders would actually go up. Huh? How is that possible? We'll talk about it. Here's the clip. Ted Cruz on I guess he has a podcast now called Verdict. It's a very weird and deranged program, but let's listen to what Ted Cruz had to say. See if you can make sense out of this.
Taking away every firearm that Michael Knowles owns would not have stopped this psychopath from murdering children in Uvalde. And by the way, we see that in Chicago and New York and D.C. and California, where they have very strict gun control.
Yeah.
And the criminals still have guns and still carry out murders. If you could wave a magic wand and eliminate all firearms in America, there would be substantially more murders than there are today.
That is an absolutely nutty comment. If you could wave a magic wand and eliminate all firearms in America, there would be substantially more murders. Think about it on an incident by incident basis. Imagine this particular shooter in Texas. The shooter maybe would have killed someone, but the odds are that without a gun, he doesn't kill nearly as many people. I've never heard of an incident, to go back to our earlier Good Liar segment, where someone kills 20 people with a hammer. I've never heard of an incident in which armed police, I assume in Ted Cruz's vision, the police still have firearms, where armed police don't go in to confront a knife-wielding attacker for 80 minutes because they're afraid. I've just never heard of that. Now, remember, we're doing imaginary stuff. If you could wave a wand, and if waving the wand actually eliminated all the firearms, how on earth would there be more murders? It is a logical impossibility. Now, it's also important to remember that the rate of firearm homicides per 100,000 people is off the charts in the United States. You look at what we're putting this up. This is from the IHME. In the U.S., the rate of firearm homicides per 100,000 people is just over 4. You then have Chile just under 2, and then a whole bunch of countries at either 0.5 or lower. You know, a lot of these places, Spain, 0.13 firearm homicides per 100,000 people. The UK, which has very strict gun control, 0.04 firearm homicides per 100,000 people. The major difference is we have the most guns. Now, do a lot of these countries have better access to mental health care? Yes, many of them do. Do many of these countries not have the toxic and depraved American gun culture? Yes, many of them don't have that. But the biggest difference is the number of firearms in the civilian population per capita. And you see the outcome of that in the rate of firearms homicides. And the major difference is we have the most guns. Apply Ted Cruz's logic to almost everything else. Well, if you eliminated all cars, you would end up with more traffic fatalities. Well, hold on. How would that work? That doesn't make any sense. Maybe if you eliminated all cars, you'd end up with, I don't know, more deaths from heart attack because there'd be no vehicles to take people to emergency rooms. Oh, okay. Well, that's plausible, and we could explore whether it's true. And much the same way, if you waved a magic wand and eliminated all guns, maybe the number of murders from other things would go up, but relative to the number of murders that can so easily be done with high-powered firearms, the number of murders would certainly go down. And at this point, they're not even thinking realistically in any way. We're not operating in the real world anymore. And they will say absolutely anything. Hey, this is the best. Donald Trump flipped out because a jury has acquitted Hillary Clinton's lawyer. If you haven't been following this story, this is the absolute best. Former Hillary Clinton campaign attorney Michael Sussman has been acquitted of lying to the FBI about Donald Trump and Russia during the 2016 election. This was supposed to be the big smoking gun. Trump was talking about this. Others have been talking about this with regard to the 2016 election. We were finally going to get the proof of everything Hillary did to me during my campaign, as Trump liked to say. And the verdict, indeed, is that Mr. Sussman has been acquitted. A Clinton campaign lawyer, Michael Sussman, found not guilty of lying to the FBI in a blow to the Durham investigation. Trump's been talking about this Durham investigation for months and months and months. A Hillary Clinton campaign lawyer, Michael Sussman, was acquitted of lying to the FBI, the first trial of special counsel John Durham's investigation. The verdict is a major defeat for Durham and his Justice Department prosecutors, who have spent 3 years looking for wrongdoing in the Trump-Russia probe. He claimed Sussman lied during a 2016 meeting in which he passed a tip to the FBI about Trump and Russia. The jury deliberated for 6 hours over 2 days and reached a verdict. The case revolved around Sussman's 2016 meeting with James Baker, a friend who was the FBI's general counsel. Sussman passed along a tip, which led to a 4-month FBI inquiry into a possible internet back channel between the Trump organization and the Kremlin-linked Alpha Bank. Both companies denied the claim. The FBI found no improper cyber links. So here is Sussman speaking about the verdict, and then I'm going to show you how Trump flipped out.
I have a few thoughts to share now that the trial has ended. First, I told the truth to the FBI, and the jury clearly recognized that with their unanimous verdict today. I'm grateful to the members of the jury for their careful and thoughtful service. Despite being falsely accused, I'm relieved that justice ultimately prevailed in my case.
So this is called due process. And Trump absolutely flips out on his platform, Truth Social.
Truth Social.
Saying our legal system is corrupt. Our judges and justices are highly partisan, compromised, or just plain scared. Our borders are open. Our elections are rigged. Inflation is rampant. Gas prices and food costs are through the roof. Our military leadership is woke. Our country is going to hell. And Michael Sussman is not guilty. How's everything else doing? Enjoy your day. This was a jury that acquitted him. This was the people. If they are for law and order and due process, then this man is not guilty. Due process has taken place. It has been adjudicated. Remember when Trump said that Durham's case was going to be bigger than Watergate and it was going to expose the biggest political crime of the century? Which, when asked, Trump said, you know what it is. He wouldn't even say what it was. Obamagate. None of these things are anything. And Fox News immediately running with the jury was in D.C. It was a bad jury. This is due process, and they don't like the outcome. Take a look at this.
But it was given the auspice of being true, not because of a media report, but because of an FBI investigation into President Trump. And at the center of that was this Sussman meeting. And Michael Sussman, the prosecutor in this case, Britton Shaw, argued that he wanted a, quote, October surprise, that was at the heart of his intentions. It doesn't appear that the jury bought that. But I think David Spunt raises a key point, Harris. The D.C. jury pool. This is an area of our country where 76% of people in the District of Columbia are registered Democrat. This was a jury pool of 37 that was whittled down to a smaller number. But of those 37 jurors, there were many avowed Clinton supporters who said they had donated to the Clinton campaign. Some of those individuals weren't chosen, but about a third of that jury pool was either a Clinton supporter or had strong feelings about the election.
Listen, in every case, in the Rittenhouse case, in any case, there's always some beliefs on the jury that might superficially seem in some way adversarial to one side or the other. But we have a process for jury selection during which people are asked, do you think you can fairly evaluate the facts? And if the facts point this way or that way, you would be able to. And people say, yes, I would, or no, I wouldn't. It's the same jury selection process you have anywhere. And this is an absurd post hoc justification.
And prosecutors were very frustrated that they would not get a fair shake here. So I think this does raise questions on how fair of a shake you can be given in D.C. with a jury pool that does oftentimes weigh partisanly in one direction.
You can't prosecute Republicans in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is, let me see, Washington, D.C. Republican, Democrat percentage. I guess it's like roughly 70 something percent. I mean, you can't, no Republican led prosecution and no Democratic defendant can be fairly evaluated because there's just too many Democrats in Washington, D.C. This is essentially what they are saying. These people are shameless. They are only concerned with the consequences. This is the due process they claim to be about. This is the law and order they claim to be about. The Durham investigation was allowed to happen. Nobody interfered with it. They were able to bring charges. They were able to show we have at least probable cause, or probable cause maybe is the wrong term. A judge said there's enough here to move forward and have a trial. You got a jury. Prosecution and defense were allowed to evaluate the jury. They settled on a jury. They had the trial. They had deliberations. They had a verdict. It was in D.C. Of course he was acquitted. Of course he was acquitted. They will never be satisfied with law and order if it doesn't give them the outcome that they want. And I mean, is this it for the Durham probe? Probably not. But we are going to continue to follow it. It's not feeling like the Durham investigation is going to expose the so-called biggest crime of the century. It's not my sense that that's the direction that it's going. Let me know. We'll be posting these stories on our Facebook page, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. We'll take a quick break and be back right after this. Follow us on social media. Interact with the David Pakman Show community. See exclusive content. See when we're taking calls live. And stay up to date on other big show announcements. We post daily. Find us on Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, and TikTok. We knew it would eventually happen, and a Fox News host is now blaming cannabis for mass shootings, and specifically for the shooting last week in Texas. Why wouldn't they eventually get the cannabis? They've blamed everything else other than guns. They blamed COVID masks. They blamed video games. They blamed doors. They blamed mental illness. They blamed COVID lockdowns and the isolation that comes from it. They blamed wokeness. They blamed, I know I'm forgetting some things, but it makes sense that they would eventually get to cannabis. And that's now what they are talking about. So let's look at this clip of Fox News host Laura Ingraham and look at the effort she goes through in order to point the finger at cannabis here, and we're going to talk about it. This is from last night's show. There's a lot here, so we'll do our best to keep up with all of it.
And speaking of drugs, according to the Daily Mail, well, the New York Times had originally reported that Ramos smoked pot. Then, mysteriously, the reference was missing from the online editions. Now, why is that? Was it bad information? Or is this the pro-marijuana bias that we've become accustomed to that's so powerful because billions are on the line with it nationwide? So is the story now irrelevant? We reached out to the Times on this, but they have not responded.
Now, we're going to keep going with this. When it comes specifically to the Texas shooter, one of the important questions would be, okay, we can talk about cannabis, but if you're going to make a claim about cannabis, are you arguing that the cannabis made him go and buy the guns? Like, was he high and decided to go buy the guns because he was high? Or are you saying that the guns were purchased with a clear mind, but then smoking pot made him say, well, now I'm going to go and do a shooting? Was he high all the time? Or like, one of the issues when people do this stuff that Laura Ingram's doing is, what is even the claim that you're making? Let's see if she makes one.
Now, the American people are hearing a lot about AR-15s and background checks, but they also deserve to hear about this as well. Respected medical studies for years now have demonstrated that pot use, especially among teens, can trigger psychosis and increase the chance that a young person will develop violent behaviors.
Now, let's say that that's true, and we're going to get eventually to the science on all of this. If that were true, it would be great. Like, let's say you're Laura Ingraham. Okay, I'm buying into what she says. If that's true, it would be great to have the opportunity to know, hey, this person smokes pot. We shouldn't let them buy guns. Well, how would you do that? One way would be to have an initial and periodic mental health evaluation, and during which people are asked about drug use, and requiring for people under age 25 who want to buy firearms, requiring letters of sort of recommendation, as it were, from adults in the community. And it would give you an opportunity to find out if this is someone who smokes pot. Now, I'm not even saying if you smoke pot, you should or shouldn't be able to get a gun. I'm merely saying if her concern is that people who smoke pot not be allowed to have guns, then why not put in some of the systems I mentioned last week to allow us to figure that out? Well, but she's against that. So even this is not something they are genuinely committed to. But let's continue.
The Association of Mature American Citizens writes, a 2017 study identified marijuana as the single most common correlative variable in otherwise diverse populations and circumstances surrounding the association of violence and marijuana.
Now, correlative is an important word because, as we know, correlations and causations are two different things, but we'll get back to that.
Reported links exist to shooters in Parkland, El Paso, Dayton, Aurora, Colorado, Tucson, Chattanooga, Sacramento, and perhaps elsewhere. Now, a friend of the Dayton shooter, Connor Betts, told authorities that he was a gun owner and that he had done hard drugs with Betts, as well as marijuana and acid, 4 or 5 times a week.
Now, that's essentially meaningless in drawing causation, hard drugs and marijuana and acid. Well, it's kind of hard to blame the marijuana in that case, isn't it?
From 2014 to 2015. Former New York Times reporter Alex Berenson has written extensively on...
Okay, Alex Berenson is a joke, and so I'm gonna pause this here. So this is actually really tricky because there are actually two questions. The first question is, physiologically, does using cannabis make people more violent, either while they are under the influence or in a future moment, even when not actively under the influence? So there's the physiological question. Separately, there's the question of, is obtaining cannabis associated with violence? And what I mean by that is, one issue could be the physical interaction of cannabis, THC or CBD, with the body. Does that cause someone to become violent? But another would be, because the cannabis market is still a black market in many places for recreational cannabis. Does being around a black market of drug dealing put you near violent situations? That's another question which you would really have to take seriously. These are dramatically different questions. Now, I'm giving Laura Ingraham too much credit because I'm pretending she's like honestly talking about this, which obviously she's not. Ingraham cites a piece by the Association of Mature American Citizens. That's just a right-wing lobby. They don't do it. It's just an advocacy group. That's a right-wing group. We have good studies on the link between cannabis and violence. And it is true that a number of studies have found a slight correlation between violent behavior among cannabis users. That's absolutely true. It's just what it is. I have no interest in denying that. They have not been able to establish any causality at this point. And additionally, it hasn't been established that cannabis makes people not predisposed to violence any more violent. And that's a critical thing. Lastly, there's no evidence I was able to find that cannabis use makes people more likely to commit crimes. We could imagine a scenario where one's threshold for aggressive behavior might be lowered by cannabis, hypothetically, but that doesn't mean that it's going to take someone not predisposed or interested in committing crimes and make them go and commit crimes because they're high. But of course, it's the typical double standard because the correlation between alcohol and crime is off the charts. The correlation between alcohol and domestic violence is completely off the charts compared to cannabis. It's a widely established link. And Fox never talks about it because it's not convenient. Laura did a bunch on this yesterday. She then brought on some guy. Let's see if we can figure out who this guy is. Saying, why aren't more people talking about this pot thing?
It was initially reported that he was a user. In fact, he got angry that his grandmother and his mother didn't want him to use marijuana. But again, we don't know more. It was just mysteriously taken out of an article in the New York Times. But why aren't people in general not talking more about the pot, psychosis, violent behavior connection?
Well, that's a very good question.
Okay. But last thought on this. Explain this to me. It's not the guns, it's the people. So there's no sense in banning any guns. But it is the drugs, not the people. And so we should ban drugs. I mean, that doesn't seem to make too much sense to me either, science aside. So there's Laura Ingraham with her new shiny toy, and that shiny toy is cannabis. Hey, I love it when these wacky right-wingers turn on each other. And Donald Trump is now furious with Kellyanne Conway, his longtime advisor. Kellyanne Conway has now made a number of statements which have infuriated Donald Trump. There's a Politico article about this. Former President Donald Trump is denying a key anecdote from Kellyanne Conway's book, saying he would have banished Kellyanne from his inner circle if she had ever told him he lost the 2020 presidential election. So what's at issue here is that Kellyanne Conway has now, Kellyanne Conway wrote, I had already said publicly what I'd said privately to George. His daily, oh, this actually isn't the right thing. Sorry, where is this here? It might not, the quote might actually not be in this article. Kellyanne Conway writes in her book, among other things, that she was one of the first people to tell Trump, you lost. You lost, and that's it. You lost the election. And Trump is now saying that that's not true. Trump posted on his platform, Truth Social, quote, Kellyanne Conway never told me that she thought we lost the election. If she had, I wouldn't have dealt with her any longer. She would have been wrong. Could go back to her crazy husband. Kellyanne Conway's husband is anti-Trump Republican George Conway. Back to the quote. Writing books can make people say some very strange things. I wonder why. Got 12 million more votes than we did the first time, the most votes by far of any sitting president. The election was rigged. They used COVID to cheat and steal, and the evidence is massive and indisputable. See 2,000 Mules, which of course is the completely bogus and widely debunked Dinesh D'Souza. I can't even call it a documentary because it doesn't document anything real. Let's call it a compilation of audiovisual elements. He's now promoting 2,000 Mules as evidence. So there's a few different things going on here. First of all, it's great when they fight amongst themselves. It weakens them, generally speaking. We should encourage it. That's number one. Number two, when you lose even Kellyanne Conway, you have to start considering that this might be the end of the grift to some degree. But at this point, Trump won't let go of this until he dies. And we don't know how long he's going to live, but he is clearly not going to let go of this false claim that he actually won and that no one around him was really saying that you lost. He is going to stick with this until he dies. He had the opportunity, as I've said before, to come out of the pandemic, easily be reelected. Okay. All he had to do was say, folks, COVID is real. COVID is scary. And we as Americans are going to come together. We're going to be patriotic. We're going to have Trump masks. We're going to have American flag and MAGA masks. I'm going to be wearing them. We should all wear them. We're going to deal with this better than anybody. We've got the best doctors and we've got the best university, but just right. Take that approach. And we need to give our medical community time to develop the treatments and vaccines that they are going to develop. Let's do it. Let's do it together. That's all Trump had to do. The left would have done it. The right would have gone with it if their cult leader said it. Instead, he was divisive. He would blatantly shun and ignore public health precautions. He almost ended up dead. I mean, look at how seriously sick with COVID he ended up being. He would talk about injecting bleach. He would attack Dr. Fauci. He would talk about China, on and on and on. He could have easily been reelected if he just took it even slightly seriously and said, I am going to be the best on COVID. Not 15 cases will soon be zero. Not ignore everything. Not we need our freedom or any of this stuff. Just follow the protocols. We're going to get through this. And he couldn't do it. It's sort of like when he was given the softballs of denouncing QAnon or denouncing white supremacy and Nazis, and instead blames both sides or says he doesn't know about it or doubles down or whatever the case may be. This guy was given, these were just teed up for him to knock out of the park, and he couldn't do it. And now the situation he's in is he is going to take to his grave the lie that he actually won the 2020 election. If you think that there is anything that would get him to admit, I just genuinely lost to Biden, I don't know what it would be, but let me know what you think could get him to admit that. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. This is my new favorite caller. This is a delightful lady from Texas who is very politely correcting me on my pronunciation of something. I can't think of a more delightful recent caller than this. Check it out.
Hi, David. I just wanted to let you know.
By the way, the voice cracking on no is even more delightful. Let's listen to it one more time.
Hi, David. I just wanted to let you know that here in Texas, we don't say Uvalde. We say Uvalde. It reminds me of you pal me. It rhymes. Uvalde. Please correct. Thank you. I know you're not from Texas, but that's the way it's pronounced here. Uvalde. Thank you. Bye.
This is the best caller. Now, I'm going to admit to you what's going on with my pronunciation of that town in Texas. As many of you know, I'm from Argentina. Okay. When I look at that word, Uvalde, to me, it's in Spanish and it's Uvalde. That's the pronunciation. Anytime I just pronounce a word the way it should be pronounced in Spanish, like Uvalde, people write in and they go, David, oh my God, you're doing that pretentious, pompous thing where it's sort of like when someone will very jarringly interrupt what they're saying to say Gonzalez instead of Gonzalez. And it's jarring and it's pretentious and it's pompous. Don't do that. And the problem with me not just pronouncing it the way it is, which is Uvalde, is I don't actually know which wrong pronunciation should I use. Uvalde, Uvalde. They're all wrong, guys, right? I mean, it's just what I need to pick the right, incorrect American anglicized pronunciation of what we all would know as Uvalde. Uvalde in the state of Texas. All right. So I apologize. I throw myself at your mercy. But that's my new favorite caller. On the bonus show today, the Uvalde police and the Uvalde school district are no longer cooperating with the Texas investigation into the shooting last week in Uvalde. We're going to talk about what's going on, building on the story at the top of the podcast today. The Supreme Court has blocked a new Texas social media law from taking effect. What's in the law and why is it being blocked? We will tell you. And lastly, there are more and more Democrats opting to vote in Republican primaries merely to vote against Donald Trump's nominee. We're going to talk about whether this is a good idea, a risky idea, etc. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show.
Oh, the bonus show where you want to make money. Everybody else that makes money to fund themselves is bad.
Well, easy, Alex. I invite you not to buy any kind of weird supplements, but just to sign up at joinpacman.com, become a member. You can use the coupon code BIGVOTING22 to save bigly. And we will see you on today's bonus show. Or if you're not a member, I will see you back here tomorrow.